It is 28 minutes past 7 on a summer morning, and a steamship is about to become the deadliest shipwreck in the history of the Great Lakes, and she will do it without ever leaving the dock. She is tied to the wharf on the Chicago River in the middle of the city. The water beneath her is barely 20 feet deep. Dry land is close enough to touch. On her decks, more than 2,000 people stand shoulder to shoulder in their Sunday best, laughing, waiting to leave for a company picnic. A band is playing, and then, slowly, almost gently, the Eastland leans, and keeps leaning, and rolls over onto her side. 844 people will never come home. Now, the Titanic is remembered as the great shipwreck of the age, and in total it did take more lives, around 1,500. But close to 700 of those were crew members. Only about 830 of the Titanic's dead were passengers. On the Eastland, 844 died, and almost every single one of them was a passenger. Which means that passenger for passenger, more people were lost right there at a city dock than on the Titanic out in the open Atlantic. It happened in front of a crowd, feet from shore, in a river you could wade across. It is one of the worst disasters in American history, and most people have never heard of it. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to a factory. In 1915, Chicago was the loudest, fastest-growing city in America, and on its western edge sat the Hawthorne Works, the largest telephone equipment factory in the world. Tens of thousands of people worked there, most of them immigrants, or the children of immigrants, with Czech and Polish and Italian and German names. They wired the machines that were knitting a whole country together by telephone. And once a year, the company threw them a picnic. For families who worked 6 long days a week, this was the biggest day of their year. They saved for it. They sewed new dresses for it. On the morning of July the 24th, 5 steamships had been chartered to carry them across Lake Michigan to a park in Indiana. The Eastland was to be the first to leave, and everyone wanted to be on her. Now, hold one more thing in your mind, because it is going to matter. More than anyone on that dock could imagine. 3 years earlier, the Titanic had gone down, and the whole world had learned a single, searing lesson. There had not been enough lifeboats. So in March of 1915, just 4 months before the picnic, President Wilson signed a new law, the Seamen's Act. Among other things, it required that a passenger ship carry lifeboats and rafts for at least 3/4 of everyone aboard. A law written in the shadow of the Titanic to make sure there would always be enough boats. Remember that law, because the Eastland had a secret. To the public, she was advertised as the speed queen of the Great Lakes, sleek and fast and handsome. But among the men who ran the rivers, she had a different reputation. She was cranky, she was tender, she did not like to sit level. That was not superstition, it was built into her. When she was designed, she was given a very low margin of stability to begin with. Then, during construction and in the years after, she was changed, made longer in some ways, given an extra deck, more weight added up high, and she had no deep keel to steady her. What kept her upright was a system of ballast tanks in her hull, tanks that the crew filled and emptied with water by hand to balance her out. In other words, the Eastland only stayed standing if someone managed the water in her belly correctly. Every single minute she was afloat. Get it wrong, and she would lean. And she had leaned before. More than once in her career, she had frightened her passengers by tipping at the dock or in open water, enough that warnings had been raised about her stability. Each time she was corrected, and each time it was forgotten. What the owners cared about was how many tickets she could hold, and they had her license to carry more than 2,500 people. Now, bring back that safety law. To obey it, the owners bolted onto the Eastland a full set of new lifeboats and rafts, extra boats, dozens of heavy rafts, and life jackets for everyone aboard. And they stacked most of that new weight high up on her upper decks, tons of it, on a ship that was already top-heavy, in the one place she could least afford it. The equipment meant to save these people if she ever sank helped make sure she would never get the chance. Now, historians still argue about exactly how much those lifeboats mattered against her underlying instability and the way her ballast was handled that morning. I am not going to pretend it is settled, but the weight was real and it sat in the worst possible place. The morning of the picnic was cool and damp. Boarding began around 6:30, and because she was the first boat out, the crowd poured onto the Eastland. Within about 40 minutes, she was packed to capacity, more than 2,500 people. And from almost the moment they began to load her, she began to list. First, she leaned one way, toward the dock. The crew worked the ballast tanks, pumping water to correct her, and she swung back and began to lean the other way, out toward the open river. They pumped again. She kept shifting. Up on deck, almost no one was worried. Some passengers, feeling the boat tilt toward the water, actually drifted over to the riverside to look out, to wave, drawn to the view. The list grew. 10 degrees. More. Down in the galley, dishes began to slide off the shelves. A refrigerator toppled. Water started coming in through the lower portholes. The gangway was still down. And still the band played, and still people laughed, because surely this was just part of the adventure. Below them, the engineer was fighting the water in the tanks, and losing. Then she reached the point of no return, and there was no crash, no explosion, nothing violent at all. The Eastland simply, slowly, rolled over onto her side in the river, as calmly as a tired animal lying down. For the people on the high side, it was almost gentle. They climbed up the rail and walked onto the hull, or stepped across onto the wharf, and lived. For everyone else, it was a trap. Hundreds were on the riverside or below decks when she went over, and the water and the furniture came down on top of them in the dark. People were pinned by tables, by the piano, by one another, and they drowned. They drowned in 20 feet of water in the middle of a great city, some of them within arm's reach of people on the dock who could do nothing but watch and scream. Rescuers dove in at once. On the streets, men threw crates and chicken coops into the water for people to cling to. But the worst of it was sealed inside the hull. Rescuers standing on the overturned ship could hear it, tapping and faint cries, coming up through the steel from the people still alive inside. Divers went down into the flooded hull and worked in the dark, treading water, finding the dead by touch, while other men cut through the hull from above with torches. It went on for hours. Nearby, an armory was cleared out and turned into a morgue, and for 2 days, families walked between the rows of the dead, looking for their own. When the counting was finally done, the toll was 844. Early figures ran higher and lower, and it took years to settle the number, but 844 is the figure history has come to. 22 entire families were wiped out, every last one of them gone in a single morning. Most of the dead were young. Many were women and children. Nearly all of them were the immigrant working people who had simply wanted a day at the lake. And then came the reckoning. The public was furious, and the machinery of justice moved. There were inquests and a federal inquiry and a grand jury, and out of it came indictments. The officers and owners of the ship, including the head of the steamship company, the Eastland's captain, and her chief engineer, were charged with manslaughter and with conspiracy. To defend them came one of the most famous lawyers in America, Clarence Darrow. And here is how it ended. In February of 1916, the criminal case was moved to Grand Rapids in Michigan, and a federal judge ruled that there was not enough to hold the men and refused to send them to Illinois to stand trial. No criminal trial was ever held. No one was ever convicted of anything. The lawsuits from the families dragged on, unbelievably, for 20 more years. The owners reached for a piece of maritime law called the Limitation of Liability Act, an old rule that can cap what a ship owner owes to the value of the wrecked ship itself. And in 1935, 2 decades after 844 people died, the highest court to hear it handed down the final word. The owners, it found, had no knowledge of the engineer's handling of the ballast, and so, under the law, they were shielded. What blame the court could find came to rest on a single engineer who had spent that morning fighting to save the ship, and even he was never punished. The families received almost nothing. 844 people were dead, and legally, no one was responsible. And the ship herself? They raised her from the river a few weeks after the disaster. Then they sold her to the United States Navy, who rebuilt her, gave her a new name, the Wilmette, and put her to work as a training vessel. She served quietly for decades and was scrapped after the Second World War. Her past was scrubbed off along with her old name. So why have you never heard of it? Part of the answer is who died. These were not the millionaires and the celebrities of the Titanic. They were immigrant factory workers with names the national newspapers could barely spell, from neighborhoods with no power and no lobby, no fund to build a monument, no one to keep their story on the front page. Part of it is where it happened. This was a civic humiliation, and Chicago was in no hurry to remember it. The city wanted to be known for its fair and its skyline, not for a ship that rolled over at its own dock and drowned its own people. Part of it is when it happened. Europe was already a year into the Great War. The Lusitania had been torpedoed just weeks before. A peacetime accident on a calm river struggled to hold attention against a world on fire. And part of it, maybe, is that there was no villain. There was no iceberg, no torpedo, no monster to point at. There was only a top-heavy ship, a safety law that added the very weight that doomed her, a ballast system only as good as the hands on it, and a long, quiet chain of ordinary decisions, ending in a courtroom that could find no one to blame. For decades, there was not so much as a plaque. The families remembered. The city mostly did not. Passenger for passenger, the Eastland was deadlier than the Titanic, and she was the worst shipwreck the Great Lakes have ever seen, and she did it all without leaving the dock, in front of a crowd, in a river you could have waded across. 844 people, dressed for a picnic, a law meant to save lives that helped end them, and a court that 20 years later decided that no one in the end had to answer for any of it. They were told it was an accident, and when the families asked who was to blame, no one answered. If this story moved you, and if you believe these people are worth remembering, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone, and subscribe so the next forgotten disaster finds you too. I will see you then.